Great. All right, we'll go ahead and get started. Hello and welcome to the Alabama Department of Archives and History. My name is Amy Williamson. We are happy to have you here for a very special conversation with Jim Peppler. On the stage today, we will have Meredith McDonough. She is the head of digital assets here at the Archives, and of course, Jim Peppler himself. So if you would, please make sure that you silence your cell phones at this time, and we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you.
Well, first we just want to welcome Jim Peppler back with us. He has been a friend of the Archives since 2009 when he donated his fabulous negative collection to us. Over 11,000 images that he took during his time as a staff photographer and photo editor of the Southern Courier. So today we're just going to talk with him about some of the images. I hope you all saw them on display in the hallway when you were walking down the hall. We've had an exhibit up here for several months. It's 51 images out of 11,000, which was not an easy selection, but they are beautiful and wonderful, and we're just going to talk with you about a few of them. And then this afternoon at 4 o'clock, we hope that you'll all be able to join us for a reception that we're going to be having, which will be a chance for you to meet Jim and talk with him and listen to some of the great music from the groups we're going to be talking about later on today. So it's a party, free food. All right, so let's begin with one of our images here. We're going to start with Newtown, which is a neighborhood in North Montgomery. And in the late summer of 1967, you spent a couple of days there at least taking photographs, just walking around. You took over 800 photographs there. And last year we were actually able to share those with that community, and they were really excited and helped us identify a lot of the people. But here on the screen we have one that is a favorite here at the Archives. So could you just first tell us what we're seeing here and tell us how you happened to take this photograph.
Okay, can you hear me? I'm talking into this, but I had spent, though, off and on over a week or so, every other day or so, going into Newtown. And in walking around, I had just come back from photographing kids who were, their only place to swim was what we would call a sump, a water drainage basin, fenced in, but that was their swimming pool. And I come back from that, I believe this was on French Street in that area. And I've been around, so every people in the neighborhood, they actually noticed me walking around with a camera, would you believe it? And a boy came up to me, and he had this pigeon that he had been nursing. It had a broken wing or something, and he'd been nursing it, and it was healthy, and his parents had told him that he had to set it free. And he was reluctant, but, he knew it had to be done. And he asked me if I would take a photograph. So I took some pictures of him, as I remember, with the pigeon, and then I had this envision of him setting it free. So we got into a little lot there, and I said, wait till I tell you. And I got down on my hands and knees, so I'm looking up, and left room in the camera to maybe catch the pigeon, anticipating getting a picture of the pigeon going up. And I said, okay, I've forgotten the boy's name, but I knew it at the time, let him go. And he went, and I went, bing, and that was it, one frame, and it was gone. And I'm saying, and it's like, I didn't even know if I had a picture or not. And it was filmed, so I didn't really know until I went back and developed it. It was like bing and gone. you're asking the significance of it to me, it is one of all the pictures I took, there are only 6 that I've actually made up prints of and mounted and keep for myself and exhibit and have in my apartment. They're the pictures that resonate with me. 2 of them from Newtown, this being one, the other one being that little baby stepping. That wasn't Newtown, that was Clayton Alley. The Jones baby stepping. I call it baby stepping. It's a little child taking steps in a doorway. And then some other things, Prattville demonstration, and some other things that had resonated with me as having a deeper meaning than just what goes on in the picture. And I've always regretted, I don't know if I ever got to give this boy the picture of him with the bird. I didn't even know if I had it until I went back and developed a film, and I don't know if I ever met him again. Blessed that he should find this picture, and you must promise to make him a print.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
There's always been that regret, but I'll lose track of what you were asking me, and I'll wander off telling you 3 other stories.
What was that significance that it had to you?
I think the deeper significance of many things don't fit words. The minute we start labeling with words and trying to describe with words, we abstract ourselves. I mean, there's this whole science of this, general semantics, about how you abstract from reality when you go into language. And abstracting always means leaving out things for the sake of making a particular point. And in people, I think more so than in any other way. I mean, you might describe a car going down the street and try to be relatively objective and get it pretty tight. But a person walking down the street, you're going to miss so much in trying to describe it in words. And there are moments in our lives when we are doing and behaving and in the midst of events that have significance that comes out of our hearts. And this little boy releasing the bird was definitely that kind of a moment for him. But also, there's this resonance of things we see that remind us. They're abstractions. They're not particular. They're a particular moment, but you see, you can read the universe into what's going on and how the effect is on you. And so, for whatever reasons, every time I look at this and any number of other images, not all, and not all just mine, all images, anything, any photograph, I'll see something new in it. I'll respond to it in a different way. I'll appreciate it in a different way, and always in a way that I would find difficult to put into words. There's just part of me is, what's happened?
We've turned it off, unfortunately, the microphone.
I turned it off?
Yeah.
Oh, no.
That's all right.
Should I put it here? We should keep my hands away from it. Okay. So,
Well, this is a good segue. We'll move on to the next image.
Because I can go on anything forever.
Another really significant part of the collection is music. And we have gotten fabulous feedback on music, and it's been international. In fact, Soul Bag magazine out of France, I just gave you the copy of it, did a beautiful spread of your James Brown photos,
yes,
all yours. And of those images related to music, over 2,000 were taken at the Wacos Club, including this one, which no particular band on stage, but it really captures the spirit of those photographs and what was going on there. So first, tell us what the Wacos Club was, and tell us why you spent so much time there with your camera.
Well, okay. The Wacos Club, which the building still exists over on Holt Street, I believe. It's now called the Big Boys with a Z, too. Okay, but it's the same building, and you'll appreciate part of the story if you ever go by and see the building. It was around the corner from a family who were very significant as resources to the Southern Courier, the Howard family. If any of you remember Bertha Howard, She was a phenomenal role model of a person, and she raised 7 daughters and a son, and all of whom were spectacular. But one of her daughters was Princella Howard, was the first reporter, local person to write a story, be a reporter for the Courier. And another of daughters, Barbara Howard, now passed on, was our staff person, did everything in the office for a long time, became a reporter, stayed with the Courier till the end. They lived around the corner from the Wacos Club. And so they knew the place, and they were related in some ways. And there was a fellow named Roscoe Williams, another phenomenal human being, who, the Wacos was his club. And so I went there on some occasion. Barbara Princella took me there, and I had a local band. The local group was the Sheiks. There was the house band, and Bob Moore and the Rhythm Aces would perform every once in a while, and all kinds of acts would come in. But the initial event was experiencing the club, as you see here, and I just love music, okay? I mean, what's not to love about music? But I'm talking about the things that don't go into words. Music is one of those levels of expression where, with words, but words and sound and music that goes to deeper places in us than the words alone. And so you come alive in richer ways with music. And so, bada boom. And I'm camera oriented. I go nowhere without it, because one of the ways I have to experience groups and real people in the world is behind the camera. And the reason for that is I'm on the autism spectrum. Way later decided, but I hide behind the camera. So visiting the Wacos Club, I took pictures. And then as a gratitude, I made prints up and took them back to Roscoe and gave them to him. And his entrepreneurial wisdom, he put them up on a display in the Wacos Club so people would come and see themselves up on the wall of the Wacos Club. I think it was Friday night, shindig night or something. And so people would come to the club to see the pictures that I had taken. And Roscoe called me over and said, listen, come every Friday, come every night, come all you want, take pictures for me, and you'll never have to buy a drink, you'll never have to order a sandwich, you'll never have to pay admission. The Wacos Club is your place to go and hang out. So every single Friday over 3 years that I would organize my schedules to hang out at the Wacos Club and take pictures. As you say, I don't know how many thousands there may have been,
2,000.
And that's what's left of about 20% of my collection was lost at one point. There are no words. You'd have to go to the Wacos or a place like it. There used to be the Elks.
That's another
the
place
Elks
you
Club
took
was an
pictures.
alternative site where you would hear music. That was more of an upscale-y kind of place. The Wacos was more working class oriented, so I felt a special comfort there. At some point, found Tom's Place, which really took me home. But
We got a spread on that as well. And a lot of great acts performed at the Wacos. You mentioned
Yeah.
Bob Moore and the Rhythm Aces, B.B. King was there, Sugar Pie DeSanto. But you also covered a lot of shows at other local places as well. And some of the acts you cover include James Brown
Yeah.
and Otis Redding and Ike and Tina Turner and the Staple Singers. Were any of those shows particularly memorable to you, or did you ever get to meet any of these performers and talk with them?
They were all memorable. I guess Ike and Tina Turner was at the Elks Club, and memorable. Well, Tina Turner remains a force of spirit, she would have been the one performer that Barbara Ann Howard was covering, writing the story for that, and we went backstage. So we actually got to spend a few moments with Tina Turner backstage. And Barbara, if she took notes, probably would have more memory of it. I just stood there, took all the pictures I could get of Tina Turner. And actually one of the pictures I took of her performing that night held in just one spotlight, wearing a white suit, surrounded by darkness, remains to me as one of those pictures that says more just about people performing, being caught in the spotlight and the center of attention. Otis Redding was downtown. I realized that where I'm staying now at the Doubletree, the room we have, look out the window across the street is the auditorium where Otis Redding performed. And at the time, it was a big deal that Otis Redding was performing in a sort of sanctioned Montgomery place. And I took pictures backstage, but on no occasion did I meet Otis Redding. And the truth is, virtually all of these performers, including Tina Turner and everyone else, I was reluctant to actually, hey, how you doing? Let's be buddies. Because for among other things, I was in awe of their music. They were like, I don't know, they did something for me that was worshipful, and I didn't feel worthy of saying, hi, I'm Jim Peppler. I was, just a guy with a camera. So I didn't really have that kind of, the communication I had with them was listening to them, experiencing, watching them perform.
Just like a fan.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah. And they could connect with me by seeing
exactly what time frame these pictures?
Oh, I'm sorry, 1965 to 1968.
3 years, yeah.
All right. Another significant series in the collection documents voter registration and preparation in 1966, as well as the elections of that year, which were the first held after the passage of the 1965 Voting Rights Act. In this photograph here, we have members of the Lawson family standing in line to vote in Lowndes County. We met the children of J.C. Lawson, who is on the far left of there earlier, a few months ago. It was last year, actually, because they recognized their dad's cane. He was a local civil rights leader, but this has always been a favorite of ours, and it's 3 generations of one family standing in line for this day. And so, of course, Lowndes County, 1966 November, this is a big deal.
Yeah.
What was the atmosphere like that day among the people that you encountered?
Wow. Confused and mixed. Within the black community, the leaders, John Hewitt, and the local people that were on the ballot for the first time were very energized and hopeful. I mean, this was through their courage and coming out front in Lowndes County, which was a very tense, potentially violent place. And they, but they on this day, I've got a picture, you see John Hewitt with a smile that lit up all of South Alabama. The people going to vote that you see here, there was, the image that came to mind when I was thinking about this is, if you've taken, I don't know, probably there are no skiers here. Okay, I'm from New York, I know, skiing is something. But if you can imagine skiing, getting on these 2 little pieces of wood and sliding down the side of a mountain where the only control was gravity, and the steeper the mountain, the faster you go, and you try to control yourself. You take lessons to do this. But with all the lessons you might take on the bunny slopes, when you get to the top of a mountain and step off and suddenly gravity is taking and you're going downhill, there's apprehension as well as whee, there's nothing like the experience of skiing if you ever get to do it. I dare you to do it and not scream your lungs out when you get to the bottom of the hill, mostly when you get to the bottom of the hill. So that was going on, and I was aware of that. Also remember there were white people, privileged white people that lived in Lowndes County that were going through a change in their lives as well, and apprehensions going on. I have one picture somewhere you'll see some TV people are interviewing some of the local people that are voting for the first time, and you can see the people, some men in uniform, listening in with interesting expressions. And so we were apprehension. And that one night, the night after this picture was taken, that the word came in. I was at a mass meeting. Stokely Carmichael was there, and we got word that somebody had been shot and killed in Fort Deposit. Turned out not to have been true. The cop had swung a billy club, hit the car, made a loud noise, and they saw the fellow fall over, and they rushed him off and thought he'd been shot, but in fact he'd just been beaten. Anyway, Stokely went crazy. I mean, he just lost it. All the tension, all the years that they put into the Lowndes County Freedom. They called themselves the Black Panthers. They had that empowerment sense. And out of nowhere, Stokely had a rifle. And he said, we're going to Fort Deposit. And suddenly this pickup truck filled with men with rifles and shotguns. I don't know where they came from, but I realized that if you lived in Lowndes County and were black, you didn't go too far from a weapon. It was that kind of reality. And this pickup truck of armed men goes rolling off the Fort Deposit. And I had this high school reporter, high school Courier reporter, high school age, Viola Bradford with me. So I had to find somebody to take care of her, and then I got my little Volkswagen and headed off for Fort Deposit. And I remember it as a moment of my own truth in that whether I had the courage that all these people had, all these couple years I've been photographing them, to go into Fort Deposit, not anticipating whatever the heck you can imagine going on. And I remember doing 60 and then doing like 2 and 60 and then 2 as I went through this debate in myself whether I really wanted to get there while it was happening or whether I couldn't wait and photograph the aftermath. And finally decided that I needed to be there. So I pumped her up to 60 and arrived in Fort Deposit, and it was nothing going on. And I walked into the police station in Fort Deposit to see what was happening. And they'd been watching me all day taking pictures. And now they had me. And the police station was filled with men. The whole police department, the sheriff's department, the auxiliary police departments and sheriff's department, all these men waiting there with their guns for whatever they could anticipate happening. And they all surrounded me and just berate me as being a white person, traitor to the cause, communist, outside agitating, whatever it went on. They had me in tears before it was over. Among the things that brought me to tears, they asked what my daddy would have thought of me. And I knew my daddy was a racist. I'd grown up listening to his racist rhetoric. And so it was, and it had happened a few months. I'm going on too long.
Well,
I know that, and it gets more poignant when I talk about an experience I had with my father. You probably don't care about.
Well, I do care about it,
Yeah.
but to keep
We'll
us
get to
on
it.
right,
We'll
to
get-
keep
yeah.
us on track. We're just so y'all know, we're going to do a complete oral history with, well, probably not as thorough as it could be. We're going to do an oral history with Jim, which eventually will be available online, that we can go into in depth in some of these topics a little further than we have time to right now. So we'll just move on to the next image, which. This is an image that was actually taken during the Meredith March, the James Meredith March Against Fear, which ties in nicely with the voting events of 1966, because Meredith began his march from Memphis, Tennessee, on June 5th, 1966, to promote voter registration, but he was shot shortly after starting out. So SCLC, Corps, and SNCC took up his cause, and they continued that march until it reached Jackson, Mississippi on June 25th. And this is a photograph of James Fondren, who at age 106 had just registered to vote for the first time. So could you tell us a little bit about where this is, and then I'd like for you to just tell us, this march lasted 3 weeks. How much of that time did you actually spend at that event, or did you go back and forth?
Okay. This is in Batesville, Mississippi. The march had started. Understand, I was the photo editor, photographer for a weekly paper in Montgomery, Alabama, and had the responsibilities of being the photographer, pretty much, although our reporters took pictures. covering a lot of things, and had to be back to develop the film, oversee the editing of the pictures, getting the prints made, getting it out for the paper, for the weekly paper. So the first I connected with the march, they'd already been on the road from Memphis. They'd gotten to just, they made a detour to Batesville. And this would have been the second. I photographed a rally the night before. I don't know where I stayed, but I stayed somewhere. And the next day they went into Batesville where the federal voting registers were at work. So which is how you got registered to vote in Mississippi, was you went to the federal voting registration. So the march detoured to acknowledge that and photograph this fellow registering to vote. Then I had to drive back to Montgomery, Alabama with the pictures. So I'd drive back to Montgomery, develop and then if there was a significant event in Montgomery or in Alabama, I'd try to get some coverage to that, and then drive back to Mississippi to catch up with wherever the march had gotten to at that point. And so I was going back and forth, spending maybe a day in Mississippi, maybe a day and a half, but always having to drive back and do my thing in Montgomery. And, unlike the media that had,
Well, that's a question I wanted to ask. Were you marching? Were you on the ground with the marchers most of the time, or were you on a truck with the media that we see in this photograph here?
There was a media truck, and I never associated from the media point of view. So at one point, I think it was on approaching Jackson, I wanted an overview. It'd been up and down hilly, which was easy, but when you got to a flat area, it was hard to get an overview of the march because you're on the same level. All you see is a few faces in front. And I was so I asked permission to get on the truck. So I got up on the truck with Life and Time and New York Times and Post and, Montgomery Advertiser, whoever was up there, and took my overall pictures, and then immediately, looked for an opportunity to get back down on this, on the walking way once I got my overview. But maybe 10, 15 minutes or so I was up there. That was about it. Mostly, I felt the need to be with the folks. And I only got to cover the march along the route one day when they took a detour to go into Philadelphia, Mississippi. That was an intense experience. Then there was a musical or a rally, where Dick Gregory and a lot of other musicians performed in Tougaloo College. And then the next day they entered Jackson, Mississippi, and I photographed somewhere in there. You'll see a picture of Stokely Carmichael carrying a woman, who had actually fainted. And Stokely Carmichael's carrying her along until they got to one of the first aid trucks to administer to her, But anyway,
Well, your primary goal here was as a journalist to observe and document, but did you ever feel like you were a participant in the events that you were covering?
Not really. I felt a sense of responsibility for being there, but I always felt that I lost myself in the being there for wanting to connect with and affirm and speak to the people that were out that I was photographing. They are the event. And at some point we were talking about the difference between photographing leaders. I'll do a.
That leads
okay,
right to the
as a
next photograph,
photographing
in fact.
people, the leaders, God bless them, they have the courage to step out front and risk the bullet, and I had the greatest respect for them all. And as much as they meant to, and much as leaders mean to any of us, in whatever cause, whatever dynamic, much as they mean, the event that is going on is the people. We're the event. In this country right now, we're the event that's going on. That's this country, that's this city, that's this community. And how we are behaving and responding and thinking is what needs to be, I think, affirmed and acknowledged. So when I'm there with a camera, I'm looking at all the faces in the church. I'm looking at all the faces along the street, in the march, along the side of the march, I'm looking to what's happening in body language, what's happening in anything that informs me and anyone of what's going on in the world. So I would lose myself in that because I'm being the witness to all of this. And so it's rarely, saw myself as a participant, although other people, that moment when I was in the police headquarters in Fort Deposit, they saw me as a participant because my being there with the camera was on the other side of a ledger that they saw as those people and them. And that's always the dilemma when we put these labels and things on. We start differentiating ourselves from one another by saying those folks and them when we're all us, So.
Right. Well, civil rights is certainly what your collection is best known for. And the image here, we have the audience at Brown Chapel in Selma. This is in 1966. Dr. King would have spoken at this event. You see the woman on the far right there fanning herself with an issue of the Southern Courier. And you photographed significant figures of the movement, Martin Luther King Jr. being the most notable because we have a large series of images of just him. But like you've been saying, just as important to you were the local people. And when you donated your collection to us, you were insistent that we make all of these images available. We digitized everything, but you wanted us not just to focus on the famous people that everyone would recognize, people would want copies of. You wanted those everyday people out there. Why was it so important for you to share those images with those people?
Okay. Well, actually, it's a good segue. It comes from what I've just said. Everyone I ever photographed, I'm a journalist, so I'm going to events, I'm going to places. And with the Courier, I was going into neighborhoods and places because when I say every one of us is what's going on in the country and in the world, when I did a story in a beauty parlor here in Montgomery or in a neighborhood or at a rock and roll concert or a blues concert or whatever it was, I'm photographing what we were as a human population, American population then. It was a chance for everyone to get their name put on the picture of them back then, or their parents back then, or their grandparents back then, so that they are recorded here as part of that history. Whether it was just standing on the sidelines looking at it, or whether it was carrying a sign doing it, or wherever they were in the world, when I was taking pictures of them, their name should be on that, because as much as the name of Ralph Abernathy or Martin Luther King or any of those wonderful people that risked the bullet to be out front and had the heart and message to inspire people. I don't know if I even put a caveat in there that I gave them the pictures on the condition that until they were all scanned and up and available for everybody to see every one of my pictures, they wouldn't get the copyrights. They had ownership because I gave it, but I held back copyrights, and only in years later realized I didn't have to put that caveat because everyone here in this place at these archives were fully on point with what my sense of the connection to everybody in the neighborhood, to the history we're all living and making. So there was no need for that, but I had to put it in there because I didn't realize at the time how pure and the goodness of the people I was dealing with.
Well, that's beautiful. The last photograph we'll talk about, this was taken during Martin Luther King Jr.'s funeral. You took about 550 photographs at that event, which was the last major thing that you covered for the Courier. That was in April in 1968, and you left not long after that for New York, and then the Courier itself ceased publication later that year. So first, just tell us a little bit about being at that event, if you would.
Okay, I'll try not to cry. There's a little nervousness that comes with just being here, and a sort of a compulsion to be fully honest because I'm in front of all of you. I try to be very honest all times, but Dr. King had spoken very much what was in my heart all his life about we as Americans being one people. Of all the rhetoric and this, especially with the Black Power and understanding where all that was coming from, there was an appreciation I always had that we're one big family. And King spoke to that so much from my heart. I got to see him, and when, so it was hard for me realizing he would no longer be there. And so, and then I had the Courier dynamic of having to, here in Montgomery and there in Atlanta. I drove overnight to get to Atlanta because I wanted to be inside at the very moment. Like 3 o'clock in the morning, I arrived in Atlanta. I've forgotten the name of the church where the funeral was held, but at 3 o'clock in the morning, the line to get in to be seated came out the church doors, went up the block, and there was no chance in the world because I was ever going to get inside. And I'm only one person with 2 little cameras covering the whole event. But it was that, I don't know what the numbers ever were, but it seemed like everybody in the world was in Atlanta that day. God bless us all that day. So I slept in the car and got up as early as I could and covered the event as best I could. On foot, I got some of it as they were weaving, and the coffin was coming by, the horses carrying it in a wagon. And then they had an event at Stillman, I think, and there was no way I could do all that, so I then had to go back, get my car, try to get to Stillman. There was already a huge crowd. I couldn't get anywhere near the events at Stillman, so I had to bypass Stillman. I think I got a few overalls, and then rush to the site of the grave site. And at that point, I'm hours ahead of the whole event, but I got there early enough so I actually got up close to where the tomb was. And I just sat right there in that spot and waited for the event to take place. Is the only way I got as intimate a picture as I felt was necessary for an event that was that significant for me, but that significant for all of us as Americans. And I got some images there. They had the tomb with the writing in the concrete and little kids coming up to look at this, and it just turned out that was the right place for me to be at that time on that day. And then I couldn't keep up with it. I did a few things with the Courier. I covered the first black mayor in the history of a major city, Carl Stokes in Cleveland. After that, and I needed that as an affirmation, but I left and went to Newsstand.
Right. 1968, of course, was a very difficult year in the United States. So by the time you left Alabama, how had your feelings, your spirits changed since you first got there, fresh out of college in 1965?
Okay, a quick anecdote, not anecdote, but also acknowledgement that Bobby Kennedy was killed. And the last event, among the things, I covered Bobby Kennedy when he was campaigning at University of Alabama, and I just finished covering him and then took him away in June. I think, I became a journalist in the process. I developed my skills, or not, whatever it is. I developed the ways to try to acknowledge what I was seeing in front of me in the camera over that time. And a lot of people came to the Courier with the idea of it as a temporary thing. Gail Falk, who was sitting in the audience, is among those who initiated the Courier, people out of Harvard. And she was one of a few that actually stayed a longer stretch. I went down to spend 3 months, and then I couldn't leave, stayed 6 months, and then I realized I was never going to leave the Southern Courier, and that's when my then wife brought our baby daughter down to stay, and she became part of the Courier. She's now Amy Johnson, but it was my way of being. You know, it was you know, it wasn't a career for me. It was my way of being. So it had a different significance from those who saw it as part of a career of journalism. I saw it as myself. I made the transition at the end in '68. I finally had to make the transition to realize that I can't just be Southern Courier photographer for the rest of my life, and made the transition to actually getting a job with a real newspaper, Newsday in New York. In retrospect now, I see that the Southern Courier I was in some ways leaving something vital of journalism, the potential journalism, to go to work for a paper that did it for money and profit as well as Newsday was a good paper. Maybe not so good today, but then it was like the New York Times is still a good paper, and the Washington Post has their good moments. But journalism has changed a lot. But when you went to that higher level of journalism, things got a little bit changed. And there was something in the Courier's acknowledgement of the actual community being the event going on in the world, and affirming and explaining and trying to show what's going on in the lives of ordinary people being the extraordinary people that make up our country. So I'm probably drifting off your question, but other people in the Courier went through different transitions because it was a part of a portfolio. For me, it was always a part of being, and then in '68, it suddenly became a portfolio. What I'd been doing suddenly became my portfolio, and I had to go around, didn't have to go around, but I told you earlier, at one point I was showing my portfolio. I was trying to get a job at Life magazine, and he looked at all, I will let him remain nameless, looked at all these pictures from the Southern Courier and said, that's not Life magazine material. He says, in all these pictures, only one that he thought had a spark of personality. My personality was evident in the picture, and it was a picture of a dead dog on the street. I mean, you know. So I right away knew I didn't want to work for Life magazine, but it was a sense of, and in a lot of journal and photography, is that you make your personal statement through the way you photograph the world. And I always felt that the world informed me by letting me photograph it as I experienced it, as it came to me, the way people looked at me, what I saw in the people, and that I could acknowledge in them, not in me making a statement about it. So anyway, I'll drift off. I'll drift off in any direction whatsoever. Yeah.
My last question, which you've somewhat covered, was just what do you feel the lasting significance was of the Southern Courier to you and to the community or the world?
Okay, thank you for that, and for the opportunity. I'm saying this to every one of you who's from Montgomery. I've been here revisiting Montgomery, driving around town. You've got appropriate markers up acknowledging where Georgia Gilmore lived, where Rufus Lewis lived, and all these things. And I went down to look where the Courier lived, which was the Frank Lew building. It's now a parking lot. But and from a distance, I saw a marker up, and I said, "Finally, they've put a marker up acknowledging the Southern Courier." And it's not. The marker has to do with the Chamber of Commerce. Okay, so I'm telling you, the Southern Courier, in the annals of history, as historians look back on journalism in the United States, they will find somehow the Southern Courier, and acknowledging the uniqueness of the Courier, the significance of the Courier as a distinctly different, more open way of relating, reporting to community. And it was here in Alabama. The headquarters of it for the 3.5 years was in the Frank Lew building, now parking lot, of Montgomery, Alabama. You should have a marker up, So that's my speech for that. But and from that, I think you get the sense of what I think the Courier is significant because of be. And the Courier has a website, southerncourier.org. Go to that website, and among other things, you will find the history of the Courier and reflections on the Courier. You will find a slideshow presentation that I created as a memorial to Martin Luther King, which I've said some of what I've shared with you and more of the significance I saw of Martin Luther King in the world. I mean, and you'll see some of it if you see the pictures.
Yeah, and all the issues of the Courier are available on that website as well.
Yes, you can go through the Southern Courier issue by issue from beginning to end and read and compare it to what you see in other newspapers and get a sense of the uniqueness that the Courier brought, I think. Yeah.
That's great. So, Amy, I think, yeah.
Sure, you can.
If you'll wait just a
Yes.
moment, Mr. Malden, we want to get you a microphone.
Yes, make
And
sure
then-
everybody can
We
hear
need to
you and
record
then
it, yes.
record. Yes.
Okay.
Hey, Jim,
Yeah.
why did you use the Southern Courier people come to Montgomery for a base to start the paper, and how did the Courier people get so involved and close to Virginia and Clifford there?
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay. You should.
Why did the Southern Courier come to Montgomery as a base to start the newspaper, and how did they get so involved with Clifford and Virginia there?
Okay. Thank you. And that question is being asked by somebody you should pay attention to. That's Nelson Malden of Malden Brothers Barbershop, the barber to King, Abernathy. Anybody who was anybody went to Nelson, and it was my barber. And he knows the things about what's going on in the world that only barbers know. Okay? Women in beauty parlors, your hairstylist knows more of the going. Okay, but. Amen. But an interesting point. When the Courier first established, and Gail can witness this, they were afraid to come to Alabama. The main office for the Courier was going to be in Atlanta, which we saw as a safe zone.
Afraid might not be the right word. We just thought it would be. I don't think we were afraid because I'd spent the last year in Mississippi. It was more. It was more that we just thought it would be creating an unnecessary target.
When I say fear, they thought we'd be blown up, and the printers would be in danger, and there was risk. I mean, obviously we were running, as Gail was running all over Mississippi, the Courier person in Mississippi for large periods of time, and we in Alabama were always afraid to go to Mississippi, but quickly when we came and we're actually in the streets and covering Montgomery, and I was the first Montgomery bureau, originally Selma and then moved to Montgomery, we realized that, like you hear about, places not to go, okay, and then you go there and you say, what's the big deal? We were, up north we would hear, okay, you'll be all right, but you don't want to try to work out of a printing shop in Alabama, and we came here, so we quickly realized we were as safe here as we were anywhere in the world, I felt. Anyway.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't just that. It was just Atlanta, especially at that time, was just a completely different world from Alabama and Mississippi, and the world we were trying to cover was rural Alabama, rural Mississippi, and so we just had to be here to do it. It was just too far away.
Yeah, amen to that. And also, real story, the first day I got off the train in Atlanta to go to the Courier place, I got stopped by the cops within a block. And who are you? What are you doing? The whole big deal. The only time I was ever stopped by the cops like that was in Atlanta, Georgia, and the Courier people informed me because I had a beard. And so I shaved my beard, put on a white shirt and tie, and ran around covering things and wasn't hassled too much, okay? The old white privilege nonsense that we're burdened with, the world is burdened with. But anyway, Paul Woolley, I should mention, of a printer here in Montgomery, Alabama, who was somewhat ostracized from the Montgomery community anyway for printing some newspaper that was scandalous somehow. He signed on to print the paper here. We found space in the Frank Lew building, and I had bought my film products downtown. We just lived, in the Montgomery community and got along fine, pretty much.
The Durs.
The Durs. Oh, I'm straying, Nelson. I'm straying off your point. The Clifton, Virginia Dur. There is a plaque in front of their house at Two Felder. Were extraordinary people, and they gave the Courier a place to stay. First place when I came here as a photographer assigned to a reporter-photographer team with Jeff Cowan. We were in the Durs, second floor of the Durs house. Second floor of the Durs house became the dark room and the photographic studio of the Courier, and the other half was the apartment that Amy and myself and our little daughter Robin lived in. And it was a haven. Well, the Durs house was a haven for anybody who dared challenge anything. And so that's the reasons we came here. And I found an extraordinary barber who told such fascinating stories. If you have time, I should ask Nelson to tell you about Dr. King and the chicken. If that story, and you'll get a sense of what he has to offer us all in terms of information about what goes on in the world.
Here, George Ann, you want to pass it to him?
Well, Reverend King and the chicken. Before Reverend King came to Montgomery, Reverend John was the pastor at Dexter Avenue Baptist Church.
Yeah.
And Reverend John used to preach on Sunday that you black people should stop going to the back doors of the white restaurants. So we have enough restaurants in our community to take care of our needs. So you dehumanize yourself by doing that to yourself. So Reverend King came in 54. He kind of picked up the same theme. We should stop going to the back doors of the white restaurants for service. So one Friday evening when we finished working in the barbershop, my boss man then said, "Hey, Nelson," said, "let's go there on Fairview and get some of that fried chicken." I said, "That sounds like a winner." We goes over on Fairview and Holt Street. The blacks went to the side door. You knock on the door, you pay for it, and you wait on the sidewalk until the chicken is cooked. So this particular Friday evening, I looked up the street and I saw this blue Pontiac coming. I said, "Hey, Warren," I said, "I think that's Reverend King's car coming." He said, "Sure is." So I know what he'd been preaching about, so I ran and jumped in the car to keep him from seeing us. By the time my boss man got ready to come and get in the car, the lady said, "Your chicken is ready." So he had to make up his mind whether he's going back and get the chicken or whether he's going to be embarrassed. So he went back and got the chicken. By that time, there was a stop sign right on the corner of Fairview and Holt Street. So by that time, Reverend King was right in front of us. Reverend King bowed to him, and he bowed to Reverend King. And I said to myself, I sure hope Reverend King didn't come back in the barbershop and say anything before the customers what he saw us do. And sure enough, the next Saturday night, I saw that blue Pontiac pull up. We had 10 customers on the seat, 3 in the chair, and 4 standing. I said, "Doggone it, there he come." He got in the chair. He says, "How was the chicken?" I said, "How do you know that was chicken?" He said, "Some of my members gave me some one time and sure was good." I said, "You better stop eating no white folk food. It's going to make you sick." He said, I said, "You pretty healthy."
Do we have any more questions? Raise your hand.
Yeah.
Plenty of time. Okay, here.
What have you done all these years since?
She asked what he's done all these years since.
Yeah. I left when I left in May of '68. I went to work for Newsday in New York. I worked there for about a year, And true story, I did a photo story like I would for the Courier in Long Island, New York. There's the Atlantic coastline. There's a place there, Long Beach, with a boardwalk and a lot of ritzy hotels and apartment buildings along the boardwalk, along the ocean, and in between were tenement houses where people on welfare and low jobs were living. And I did a story on the people that living in these tenement houses surrounded by all this luxury. And a lot of them were dark skinned. And I had a wonderful picture story. Courier would have run it in a second. And the word came down that Newsday wasn't going to print it. And I said, why? And they said, because the editors feel they've had too many black faces in the paper this year. So I quit Newsday. And I went up, joined Gail Falk in New Haven, got a job at a place up in New Haven, a youth center, where Gail was in law school there, and stayed there. But after about a couple of years, I realized that if you're going to want to change in the world, you couldn't run away from where change needed to happen. So I went back and came back to Newsday in like 71. And I was at Newsday from 1971 to 2008, watched Newsday change, and somewhat, and then in 2008 they fired us all and did away with the photo department, started using freelancers and all the things that journalists are doing. So until then I was a working journalist with a major paper covering the world. I mean, they sent me all over places. And from 2008 I was teaching photojournalism. And now I'm retired, and I'm doing essentially, in some ways, what I originally started doing with the Southern Courier. I call myself a community photographer, and if there's a community event going on in some nonprofit group that can't afford their own photographer, that are being ignored by the local Kingston Times, Daily Freeman newspapers, I'll go there and I'll photograph them like it's a serious event, and I'll give them the pictures for them to have for themselves, for their own history, and also to share with all the people that attend them to know that they belong there. And I do that absolutely refusing to take a dime of money for it, because I've got Social Security. What the heck do I need with money? You can live on that. And I will not take money for photography, but I'm a community photographer. And essentially the Courier, I mean, we got, $15 a week was our salary on the Courier. And I feel like I'm back to that again. It's like a big circle. I'm glad you asked that question. Otherwise, I'd never had a chance to share that.
One last question.
I love your images. We've used them for presentations here at the archives. And one of my favorite images is actually shows the connection that you were making with the communities. You actually took photographs of a wedding, and your wife was actually a member of the wedding party.
Amen.
So, and that's what I love, is that connection that you were making with the community. Now, were you able to retain some of those connections with the people that you made in the African American community after you left?
Oh, yeah, to a large extent. Yeah. And incidentally, my daughter, Robin, it was one of the flower girls in that wedding, and she would have been 5, maybe 6. It was a wedding of Susie Sanders, who was one of the first 2 African Americans to integrate Lanier High School, which was located like a block up from Felder Avenue where we were staying. But I've lost touch with Susie Sanders, but I have maintained. There was a fellow here you were blessed to have living here, Norman Lumpkin. Okay. At the time, he was the news director at WRMA station. He and I were like, I'm forgetting the name of who the popular detective, white and black detectives were at the time, but we covered things together, Norman and I. And I would have his back in some neighborhoods, and he'd have my back in other neighborhoods. But Norman and I were a team. And he introduced me to a lot of people. And so I maintained contact with Norman. He went on to Atlanta, I think, at some point, but lived here, and his wife Thomasina still lives here. And I would come back to see them periodically, and the Howard family. Through the years, I maintained contact with the Howards that I still have. And Wanda, I saw just the other day, is at the Dexter Avenue Baptist Church. And and when we had the Courier reunion in Nelson, we never get too far from Nelson because, frankly, he knows all of our secrets. So go get a haircut and ask him the backstory on Jim Peppler, and you'll hear things that I've forgotten about. I have, and human contacts are. I mean, I'm a reclusive person. So I'm not as connected to people as others in the Courier staff have been, but that's just because of my personality, not because of the love that's still shared with me.
Well, let's give Mr. Peppler a round of applause again. And thank you all for coming today.
And just another reminder, at 4 o'clock this afternoon, please join us in the Milo Howard Auditorium so you can meet Jim in person and mingle and eat some snacks and listen to music.